Millions of rounds fired later, their echoes ringing out. U.S. federal troops called in, including the Air Force. And all that most of these striking mine workers wanted was the democratic process that many of them had just fought for during the Great War, World War I, to work, and for justice to be applied evenly and fairly as U.S. citizens. August 1921 would be the most violent chapter of the mine wars at the Battle of Blair Mountain, where not only a clash of arms occurred, but a clash of visions for American society. Hi, I'm Josh. Welcome to Mountain Roots. This is the 44th episode of my Exploring Appalachia series. Today, I'm headed to Blair Mountain to see the area that was at the heart of the West Virginia mine wars in Appalachia. Blair Mountain is located in Logan County, West Virginia, the southwestern part of the state. On my drive, I began wondering why. What happened to escalate tensions to such a powder keg situation? It dawned on me that conditions were primed due to the wartime economic boom surrounding World War I. That war had a profound effect on the lives of working people in the United States, because until then, there was routinely a surplus of labor, making unions somewhat redundant. But labor relations forever changed once the war broke out, flipping circumstances on their head as the economy heated up to keep pace with the wartime effort of producing and exporting goods for home and abroad. The influence of workers and unions grew. In fact, some unions saw their membership swell by 10 times the amount during the war. One of the largest and most powerful of these unions was the UMWA, the United Mine Workers of America. At the time, even President Woodrow Wilson was viewed as a champion for unions, although his pro-labor policies would end with the conclusion of the war. And when it did, clashing visions of how industrial America should look had workers and unions locking horns with company owners, while government took a back seat. Labor strikes increased as company owners reasserted themselves, tensions escalated. It was these opposing visions that ultimately led to the largest armed conflict at the Battle of Blair Mountain since the war between the states, when the North and South clashed in bloody battle. If you've followed my Exploring Appalachia series, you've seen in many of my episodes that West Virginia is rich in natural resources, chiefly coal. It was also a very difficult place for unions here due to the rugged terrain, isolated towns, and the fiercely independent character of the locals who called it home. For extraction industries like coal and the absentee mine owners, it was an ideal situation where they could exert near absolute control over the lives of workers. Mining companies justified their quasi-industrial police state here with its extensive economic and political powers as necessary to combat the notorious boom and bust cycles of the industry. This translated to two things: very poor living conditions in company-owned towns, which nearly 80% of the mining towns in Appalachia were company-owned, and extremely dangerous working environments for coal miners, all under the guise of keeping costs low. Rather than citizens, workers were treated as mere disposable serfs. These company towns were a perversion of justice, where mine companies controlled both civil and commercial life. If you've seen my television show on PBS called Hometowns, in Season 1, Episode 2 on Bluefield, I showed you the way miners were paid, not in any U.S. currency, but rather a voucher-type system known as scrip that could only be used in company stores. And if miners desired to exchange it to actual currency, the exchange alone would siphon off 25% of their earnings. This type of control also allowed companies to offset any wage increases by simply increasing their own prices on necessary goods. Mine owners also forced workers to sign yellow dog contracts. These contracts banned workers from joining unions, and if they were caught joining, they, along with their families, would be thrown out of company-owned housing. These conditions led to the UMWA organizing in West Virginia as early as 1912, and a prominent unionizer arose in the midst of this era named Mother Jones. When strikes occurred, company enforcers would fire shots into strikers' homes, even declaring martial law. Violence had become the norm in Appalachian labor relations. And where there was violence, there was often the Baldwin-Felts agency, a private security firm employed by mining companies for one thing: union busting. Their ranks were a cocktail of hired guns, including former soldiers, policemen, convicts, and miners. They would work as mine guards, informants, and at times, to give the appearance of authority of the law, they would be sworn in as railroad detectives, constables, or deputy sheriffs. They were hated by union miners and leaders for their forced evictions and brutality. They represented the major obstacle to unionizing in West Virginia. But by 1919, nearly half of the state's mines were unionized. Yet few of those were in the southwestern part of the state, including the areas of Mingo and Logan counties. If you watch my previous episode on Matewan, West Virginia, you'll learn a massacre took place there. It was an unusual town in that it maintained some independence from the coal companies. Its police chief, sheriff, and mayor were union-friendly. By the way, its police chief was none other than Sid Hatfield, and on one fateful spring day in 1920, the Baldwin-Felts agents showed up by order of the mine owners to evict families from their homes via the Yellow Dog contracts I mentioned earlier. Hatfield and the mayor tried arresting the Baldwin-Felts agents despite their claims they had a warrant to arrest Hatfield. After inspecting the warrant, the mayor said it wasn't legal, that it was bogus, and that's when it's claimed the Felts agents shot the mayor and a gunfight started. Later accounts make it unclear who shot who and who shot first, but regardless, Union busters of Baldwin-Felts were dead along with 2 coal miners. This incident became known as the Matewan Massacre, and it galvanized the Union movement, seeing Union membership swell by 1921. It also led to a county-wide martial law being declared by the governor that only applied to unionizing miners. Union activists were jailed without trial, and miners' families were assaulted in their makeshift camps. As strikes increased and mine owners brought in strike breakers, the homeless coal miners and their families began gathering and living in tent colonies under grim conditions. Unions attempted to provide basic food, shelter, and medical services. Journalists described the miner colonies as having hundreds of families huddled pitifully around small fires under canvas that flapped in the high winds. Many tent dwellers lived on bare, frozen ground, and several children had died of pneumonia, all while witnessing newborn babies present and many pregnant women. Unsurprisingly, mine companies dismissed such accounts as being exaggerated. In spring of 1921, skirmishes began breaking out between armed strikers and strike breakers along the Tug River. Then West Virginia Governor Morgan asked U.S. President Warren Harding to intervene, but he would not, taking the position that the matter was a state problem. Since Washington wouldn't help, Governor Morgan called upon volunteers, police, and the Baldwin-Felts agency to begin raiding these Union territories to make arrests. The government also went after Sid Hatfield, putting him on trial for conspiracy, and this is where things came to a head. In my episode on Welch, West Virginia, which has been viewed millions of times online now, I showed the very spot on the courthouse steps where in August of 1921, Baldwin-Felts agents ambushed Hatfield and his deputy, Ed Chambers. Both unarmed, were shot dead in front of their wives. The Baldwin-Felts agents would later be acquitted of any wrongdoing. However, I wonder if history now judges differently. The murders epitomized the ordinary mine workers' helplessness to resist the brutality of the pervasive mine guard system. These killings ignited the fuse in West Virginia. Immediately, Union leaders organized a rally in Charleston, West Virginia, where 5,000 miners arrived, and many were armed. The miners now believed they were in a battle to reclaim their basic rights as American citizens because their pleas to the governor had gone unanswered. The more radical coal miners took control of the movement, stealing weapons from the company stores, not least of which was a Gatling gun. To reach Mingo County, an estimated 15,000 miners, white and black, native-born and immigrants, wearing red bandanas as a symbol of their solidarity, became known as the Redneck Army. They would now have to pass through Logan County. Approximately 3,000 anti-Union forces were there to meet them, gathered on the towering heights of Blair Mountain and its 15-mile ridgeline. There they built breastworks and trenches on the two peaks overlooking the Blair Mountain Gap. These anti-Unionists also armed 3 private planes with homemade bombs to add to their arsenal. In a last-ditch effort to prevent the pending doom, West Virginia Governor Morgan asked Washington again for help, to which an appeal to the Union forces' patriotism was made to disband or else face a snuffing out by the U.S. Army. And at first it looked like thousands of miners had agreed to simply go home. For them, they had no interest in fighting Uncle Sam. But as fate would have it, while they were waiting to catch trains to take them home, coal operatives sent nearly 300 police to raid the town of Clothier to carry out arrests, but were ambushed before they could get there. Rumors spread that police shot women and children in the gunfight, which rekindled the anger of miners who had otherwise planned to go home, now returned to the fight. On August 30th, 1921, miners moved into positions around Blair Mountain, and the next day the battle began in earnest. Police and anti-Union forces were entrenched with numerous strongholds equipped with machine guns. Miners tried to outflank the toughest positions, but were repelled by rifle and machine gun fire. Gas and makeshift nail bombs were dropped in efforts by private aircraft to hit the miners. Despite superior numbers, the miners lacked strategic direction. By September 1st, Air Force planes appeared above Blair Mountain to signal the imminent arrival of U.S. federal troops. Seeing the writing on the wall, the miners pulled back. Within a couple days, a ceasefire was agreed upon. Despite over 1 million rounds being fired, estimates are that around only 100 or so people were killed. In the event's aftermath, political attacks and counterattacks were leveled as to who was to blame for things getting so out of hand. Governor Morgan even leveled claims that the UMWA was linked to international socialism and urged the military to arrest its leaders, but the president refused. Later reports by the FBI did not substantiate these claims of socialist espionage and influence. True, there were radical groups who reacted to the events in West Virginia, but they were not directing them. These miners upheld the ideals of hard work, the American dream, and patriotism. They weren't opposed to capitalist principles, they only wanted the rules applied fairly to workers. I'm convinced there wasn't more bloodshed that day at Blair Mountain because the miners believed in the rule of law, not a perversion of it. They weren't there to revolt against the government. In fact, it's documented many of them waved American flags as they marched off after the defeat. The sad reality was the conditions leading to the uprising in the first place would remain for another decade until federal labor laws would give miners another chance to reunionize. The union itself was shattered. Its membership crashed from 50,000 at the time of the Battle of Blair Mountain to barely 600 a decade later. Legal battles, strikes, post-war decline in demand for coal, and an unsympathetic public left the Union in ruins, and its coffers empty. For over a century now, the West Virginia Mine Wars and the Battle of Blair Mountain have been largely kept out of history textbooks for fear it would tarnish the state's image. Even in recent years, the mountain itself has been the target of companies looking to surface mine it. In 2006, Blair Mountain was designated as one of the United States' most endangered historic places. There was a nearly decade-long standoff as to whether Blair Mountain would remain on the National Register of Historic Places, and only after suit was filed did the keeper of the National Register declare that the removal of Blair Mountain's listing was an error. Those who don't remember the past or know their history are condemned to repeat its mistakes. They're like a tree with no roots. The mine wars are an important moment in U.S. history that doesn't always get the attention it deserves. And that's why I made this episode. And I have one more stop to make. I spoke with a local resident in Clothier who told me that the local UMWA only has 2 members now. Her fear is workers have learned nothing from the past, that they don't even know about it, placing themselves in the hands and at the mercy of the powerful once more. Where do we go from here? How can we achieve a meritocracy unencumbered by the extremes of socialism and the excesses of capitalism, yet at a human scale that honors the dignity of our humanity and our natural resources, and free of the perversions of justice that history is wrought with? Episode of Exploring Appalachia, looking at the Battle of Blair Mountain and the events that led up to it. If you've followed me for the last year and a half, as I've developed the Exploring Appalachia series, certainly telling the story of Appalachia isn't all about coal, but coal is at the heart of the story here in West Virginia, East Kentucky, and Southwestern Virginia. So I do want to take proper time and dedicate it to telling that part of the story that often gets overlooked and certainly suppressed, especially like the Battle of Blair Mountain and the story that's here. I do want to tell this in a longer format. I would love to do a proper full-length documentary on this. As many of you know, I'm now working with PBS Appalachia, launching a new station there and producing television shows for them. And I do have some backing and support there to work on these kinds of projects, but to produce a full-length documentary takes proper underwriting. It takes resources. So if you're out there watching and maybe you or you know someone or a foundation or an organization that would like to get behind these types of stories and the documentaries that could be made in the style and the format that you've grown to enjoy here on Mountain Roots, and even some of the work I'm now doing at PBS, reach out to me. Send me an email at the mountainrootsmail@gmail.com, or find my website, mountainrootsproductions.com, and reach out to me there through the contact form. I would love to talk with you, because at the end of the day, I don't have unlimited resources, and I certainly couldn't do this without your support. I get a little bit of funding through YouTube, but it's not much. It helps pay some of the gas to keep the wheels turning. I do have valued patrons who have supported me, some of you since the beginning of the Exploring Appalachia series. That's also a way to help fund these projects. But to do a full-length documentary, I need an entire pillar of support that would come in the form of some kind of underwriting to do that. So again, if that's you or someone you know and you would love to hear these stories told and see it in a longer format, documentary style, reach out to me. I'd like to talk with you and see if we couldn't collaborate. Thanks again for watching this episode, and as always, I really appreciate you taking the time to leave comments and share your own stories, maybe your family's histories related to these events at Blair Mountain or the surrounding towns, or even, in other states, maybe you've had, family stories passed down that have echoes of the same struggles that we see here in Appalachia. Love to hear from you. Leave those comments below, reach out to me, and we'll see you in another episode.